You'll be here. You'll be here.
For those of you who just joined in, we'll be starting in about 3 minutes. Please settle in. Tonight's talk will be about the Masters Building. Our presenter tonight will be Stephanie Azzaroni, and we'll be getting started soon. So. Also, feel free to say hi in the chat. Again, throughout the night, if you have any questions, always place them in the chat, or if you have anything that you guys want to follow up. I'll also be posting our website where you can find the link to the recording for tonight's talk and any other previous talks we've done. If you are interested, feel free to visit after you finish this Zoom call tonight and share the link with your friends. All right, we'll be getting started soon. We're recording this and live streaming this on YouTube, so if it'll be ready to review for tomorrow morning. And all right, one last time. For all of those who just joined in the past couple minutes, tonight's talk will be about the Masters Building. Our presenter is going to be Stephanie Azzaroni, and here to do our introductions is Jim Mackin. You can find the recording of our tonight's talk at upperwestsidehistory.org. I just put the link in the chat. If anybody wants to share it with their friends or anybody who can't stay throughout the whole night and won't need to miss part of it, you can find the recording link there tomorrow morning. Thank you, everyone. And Jim, take it away.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation by Stephanie Azzaroni about the Master Apartment Building. I am Jim Mackin. I'm one of the dozen or so members of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group. If you want to know more about our neighborhood history, be sure to bookmark our Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group website, upperwestsidehistory.org. I always tell people that if you don't remember that, just Google Bloomingdale history and you'll probably get us. We do such things as exhibits at the Bloomingdale Local Library. One of our members, Rob Garber, has a spectacular exhibit on sports and leisure in Upper Manhattan, which runs through the end of this month to April 30th. And then the next one has to do with Bloomingdale's flower and nursery industry. What a pleasant surprise that is. And that'll run from May 1st to July 31st. You've probably seen another member of our group's article in the West Side Rag. Marjorie Cohen did a whole thing on Polly Adler, the infamous madam who lived on the Upper West Side. We also have a tour next Wednesday, 6 o'clock. Starting from Strauss Park. We do tours once a month. So next Wednesday, 6 o'clock, Strauss Park. We have a future program coming up on June 3rd. Our Manhattan Borough historian, Robert Snyder, wrote a wonderful book. In fact, it's the only detailed book on the COVID experience in New York City, called When the City Stopped: Stories from New York's Essential Workers. It got a very positive review in this week's New Yorker. It's been reviewed in other books. So, but let's get back to the Master Building. I first came to the Master in the 1970s. My wife and I lived in the West 60s. We would take the M5 bus up Riverside Drive because we had subscriptions for years to Equity Library Theater. I remember seeing Danny DeVito before he was famous. But I always knew we were in a very special building, and I suspected it had a very special history, but I didn't know much about it. So we're most fortunate to have Stephanie Azzaroni this evening. She's one of our Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group members, and she is now the expert on Riverside Drive and all of its spectacular parts, including the Master Building. She leads tours of Riverside Drive. In fact, if you were on her last tour about 2 months ago, it was overwhelming with more than 50 people, but boy, did we manage, and a lot of people got to know each other. And Stephanie recounted some wonderful history. And thanks to Stephanie, and thanks to Michael, and thanks to our whole group, and thanks to all of our new friends at the Master Apartment Building, 240 people have signed up to watch this presentation. So this should be quite special. Stephanie has a new book called Fabulous Fountains of New York. It's very comprehensive, all fountains in New York City. And for additional information, you could simply go to her website, stephanieazzarone.com. If you want to know more about our neighborhood history, again, go to our website, upperwestsidehistory.org. But now let's sit back and enjoy Art, Theater, and Murder, the Master Building, presented by our wonderful Stephanie Azzarone. Stephanie, take it away.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Michael. And a very big thank you to the residents, both current and past, of the Master Building, who were so generous in sharing their time and knowledge with me, both for my first book, Heaven on the Hudson, but also for this presentation. You were fabulous, especially Kathy Ralph, Monty Freeman, Randy Turner. And also a shout out to Virginia Leaf, who is a resident of the building and was one of the founders of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group. That said, welcome everyone to 310 Riverside Drive on the northeast corner of 103rd Street, also known as the Master Building, aka the Master Apartments, or simply the Master. It is named after the Master Institute of United Arts, once located here, or it could be named for the man who founded that institute, who was often referred to as the Master with a capital M. More on that in just a moment. Built in 1929 and 29 stories tall, the Master is to this day the tallest building in all of Riverside Drive, and architecturally one of the most distinctive in Bloomingdale. It was the first skyscraper and the first residential building in the entire city to have these wraparound windows, corner windows. In this case, offering stunning views of the Hudson River. And that's just one of its many design treasures. Architectural historian Andrew Dolkart called it, quote, among the finest Art Deco high-rise structures in New York City. It is also, here we go. It is also an officially designated New York City landmark, one of only a few residential landmarks in Bloomingdale, as opposed to public buildings. In all of Bloomingdale, as if that weren't enough, it is also listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This evening, we will talk not just about its design, but also its history and the people who have made it special. The Master came to be because of this intriguing looking gentleman, the highly charismatic Nicholas Roerich. We will focus on him for the next few slides. Roerich has most often been described as a Russian painter, philosopher, and explorer. He painted at least 3,000 works of art. Sometimes it's said as many as 7,000. As a philosopher, he focused on ancient and Eastern philosophies, and his travels took him to India and Central Asia, including Inner Mongolia, Manchuria, and China. A New York Times article expanded the list of Roerich descriptives, hailing him as, quote, a sage who was also an archaeologist, art historian, furniture designer, poet, peace activist, botanist, spiritual philosopher, mentor to Marc Chagall, political advisor, costume designer, women's rights advocate, and founder of a yoga society. So, not exactly your basic boy next door. Roerich, meanwhile, promoted himself as a master in the belief in ancients who could transmit messages and knowledge to believers. Some simply called him a mystic. During his time in the US, Roerich mesmerized many wealthy Americans who formed around him something like a cult. Albert Einstein and Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt were among his admirers. There were Roerich Society branches all around the country, and Roerichism, as it was called, was a spiritual, cultural, and social movement that drew ideas from theosophy, Eastern and Western religions, and Buddhist traditions. Roerich was also known for proposing a treaty for the protection of cultural treasures during times of both war and peace. This became known as the Roerich Pact, and in 1935, it was signed into law at the White House and also adopted by 20 other nations. For his work in this area, Roerich was nominated for a Nobel Prize. Roerich also suggested that a flag named the Banner of Peace be flown over all the places under the treaty's protection. The design, in magenta on a white background, featured 3 dots, which are accompanied by at least 2 different interpretations, both cited by Roerich himself. They either represent art, science, and religion as aspects of nature, of culture, excuse me, and culture is represented by the surrounding circle, or they stand for the past, present, and future. This design will come up again toward the end of this presentation. Over time, this very prolific artist created work focusing on the preservation of ancient heritage sites, peace, pantheism, and the Himalayas. He created natural and historic scenes, incorporated rich colors, and exhibited at such prestigious museums as the Louvre in Paris, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and the National Museum of Stockholm. Very impressive. He was also the set designer for operas and ballets, including Daliev's Ballet Russe and Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, for which he also designed the costumes. The magnetic Roerich, shown here with his wife Helena, herself a writer on Buddhism and other philosophical subjects, was born to an upper middle class family in Russia in 1874 and left the country after the 1917 Russian Revolution. He arrived in the US in 1920 after receiving an invitation from the Chicago Institute of Arts to conduct an exhibition tour of 30 US cities. The tour launched that year at New York's Kingore Gallery. Sina and Maurice Lichtman, meanwhile, were Russian pianists who were taken with Roerich, and together they sought to create a school that would teach a broad range of subjects, art, architecture, music, and more, to American youth. The school, the Master Institute of United Arts, of which their piano school became a part, was formally established in November 1921 and began operating in a large studio above a Greek Orthodox church at 310 West 54th Street. 2 years later, in 1923, Maurice Lichtman purchased a 3-story corner mansion at 310 Riverside Drive, same address as the current skyscraper master building. This mansion became the temporary home of the Master Institute of United Arts and of the Roerich Museum, exhibiting about 750 of Roerich's paintings. Enter Louis Horch, a devotee of Nicholas Roerich.
Building is today.
Horch was a foreign exchange specialist, first for the US government and then for his own firm, Horch Rosenthal. He and his wife, Nettie, were patrons of the arts. In fact, she was Fine Arts Chair of the National Council of Women of the US from 1937 to 1954.
Yeah.
And she was interested in Buddhism and Theosophy. As you can see, this is a photo. In the 1950s, Horch was chair of the Bloomingdale Conservation Project, a program to rehabilitate the Upper West Side neighborhood where the master was located, right here in Bloomingdale. It was one of the first efforts to upgrade dilapidated row houses on the Upper West Side. I mention that in particular tonight because I discovered that if you Google the Bloomingdale Conservation Project to learn more about it, the first site that turns up is tonight's host, the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, although the focus isn't quite the same. In 1925, Horch purchased the Lichtman Corner Mansion for $195,000. Let's go back here for a moment. He also began buying, actually, I'm going to go back to this one. He also began buying from other owners the adjoining properties. So altogether, lots 40, 42, 43, and 76 on this map right there from other owners. This effort took about 3 years in total. And meanwhile, Horch secured a bond to fund construction of the skyscraper that would replace the mansions that he planned to tear down. And this is an example over here of what the map looks like with the master building replacing it. The Horches were Roerich's leading financial patrons, investing over time somewhere between hundreds of thousands to more than $1 million in Roerich projects, including the Master Institute and later the Roerich Museum. One report said, quote, "They bought his pictures, paid his bills, and sent his son to Harvard." They owned hundreds of the artist's paintings. To design the new building, Horch hired architect Harvey Wiley Corbett of the firm Helmley, Corbett and Harrison, and that firm partnered with Sugarman and Berger. Corbett was a recognized specialist in skyscraper design, who long believed that the skyscraper was the most important American contribution to the field of architecture. The New York Times called the master a formidable venture in combining living space and culture. And you can see here, this sketch, as you can see, invites potential residents to live in a home of art and culture down there in the lower right-hand corner. And this is how the master combined the two. The first 3 floors were devoted to all things Roerich. The first floor contained a large gallery space for Roerich's art. And this became part of the Roerich Museum, which officially opened on October 17th, 1929, 11 days before the stock market crashed. There was also a small conference room on the first floor and an auditorium or theater with approximately 300 seats. The second floor also contained museum space, now an office and a number of small businesses. Altogether, the museum held over the years about 1,000 Roerich works. Museum entry was free. The third floor held the school, in other words, the Master Institute of United Arts, and included music practice rooms, where, likely to better contain the sound, the walls were thicker than elsewhere in the building. The third floor was also likely the location for the library, which, among other treasures, contained ancient Tibetan manuscripts. The Master was also home to other Roerich-related organizations, the Corona Mundi Art Center, whose goal was to bring art to people around the world who did not otherwise have easy access to it, as well as the Urasvati Institute, which was dedicated to research in the Himalayas, where Roerich later spent much of his time. The entrance to the museum was on Riverside Drive, while the entrance to the residence was and is today on 103rd Street, as is a separate entrance to the auditorium, more to the east. A copy of a Roerich painting titled Battle in the Heavens from 1912 is hanging in the main lobby by the front desk. The rest of the building, above the third floor, was dedicated to originally 344 apartments, intended as affordable living for artists and musicians. Although a 1930 census showed that it was also home to salesmen, managers, and teachers. The vast majority of the apartments were studios, although there were a few 2- or 3-room apartments. And over time, many of those studios have been combined into larger living spaces. The Roerichs and their associates occupied 20 of those apartments, all for free. Although Roerich himself only lived there about a year. The rental income from those apartments was intended to support the cost and maintenance of the school and the building. But this was not your typical apartment building. Instead, it was, at the start, the Master Apartment Hotel. This sign, now in the lobby, most likely first stood outside the building on the sidewalk as an advertisement. An apartment hotel meant that instead of kitchens and stoves, the apartments had pantries, which were basically just storage spaces for food, dishes, and other items. The builders probably chose that route because there were fewer height and fire restrictions on apartment hotels than on traditional apartments, meaning they could build higher, yielding more apartments and more rental income, and didn't have to spend on the usual appliances or deal with fire codes. Although some of those pantries were altered starting in 1947, one resident who moved in just 50 years ago found only a hot plate and a half-size refrigerator awaiting her. In any case, when the building opened, lack of a stove was not a problem because there was a restaurant on the first floor specifically for residents. And this was the stained glass that once decorated the Riverside Drive entrance to that restaurant. Originally, the rental fees also included maid service. And one resident noted that some people still had that provided when she moved into the building in the 1970s. In the beginning, one could rent an apartment, either furnished or unfurnished, for, as you can see here, a grand total of $50 per month. Over time, however, there was a falling out between Roerich and Horsch, the reasons for which remain unclear. A former director of the Roerich Museum referred to it as something personal. We do know that the Depression impacted the building's financial situation and that the building was taken over by a court-appointed receiver in 1932. A court battle ensued over who had control over it, Roerich or Horsch. And in the early 1930s, Horsch won. In 1935, he sued Roerich for $200,000 in unpaid loans. While in the same year, the IRS pursued Roerich for tax fraud. Meanwhile, Roerich's popularity was beginning to fade. Finally, in 1938, Horsch asked Roerich and his followers to leave the building. Roerich was traveling in Central Asia at the time. He took up permanent residence in India and never returned to New York. He died in India in 1947 at the age of 73. And while he may no longer be a well-known name here, he is still well regarded in Russia. And his work has frequently been the object of bidding wars among Russian oligarchs. At a London auction in 2013, one of his works sold for over $12 million. The Roerich Museum remained open until 1938, after which Roerich's work was put into storage. That same year, the Roerich Museum sign above the Riverside Drive entrance was taken down and replaced with the Riverside Museum sign, which is still there. This museum was also free to the public, and it featured the work of, at the time, up-and-coming artists, such as Louise Nevelson, Jasper Johns, and Milton Avery. It was one of the city's earliest contemporary art museums, and it was credited with contributing to the acceptance of abstract art in the US. It later held the first exhibit of psychedelic art, and in 1964, it presented a special exhibit entitled West Side Artists, New York City, which featured works in the styles of abstraction, expressionism, and abstract expressionism. The Riverside Museum and the Master Institute closed in 1971. And that year, the Roerich collection of art was absorbed by Brandeis University. After Louis Horsch's death in 1979, the building was purchased by real estate investor Saul Goldman, then the city's largest private landlord, who continued to operate it as a rental until it converted to a co-op in 1988. But the Master was far more than a home to a school and art museum. It was in many ways the neighborhood's cultural hub. During Roerich's time, the auditorium was the scene of lectures on world unity, economics, science, religion, philosophy, contemporary Russian composers, and problems of modern women, the latter rather, presented by none other than Eleanor Roosevelt. On that note, some people in the neighborhood, as Jim mentioned, remember well that the Master was the longtime home from 1961 through the 1989-90 season of the Equity Library Theater, one of the longest continuously operating theaters in the country, and devoted to providing work to unemployed actors and free theater to New Yorkers. It featured stars such as Jason Robards, Rod Steiger, Tony Randall, and James Earl Jones. Ann Mira and Ben Stiller, who at one point lived on Riverside Drive, also performed at the Master. But it turns out that the building was active in theatrical presentations and education long before that. I was able to trace advertisements for various theater companies and schools back to 1933. In the 1940s, the Abbey Practical Workshop, situated on the premises, was enrolling players for experimental productions. Shown here are its directors, Robert O'Byrne and Gloria Monty. The National Youth Theater, the Oxford University Players, and the Laughingstock Company were among the many that performed there in the 1950s. That same decade, the Master Institute of Drama and Dance Workshop presented adaptations from the writings of Samuel Beckett, Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, Edna St. Vincent Millay, and Maxim Gorky. Other shows at the Master ranged from Moliere's The Miser to Aristophanes' Lysistrata to the musical comedy Applause. The Master was also the location of various other events, including numerous operas, among them La Bohème, Medea, and Aida. Musical concerts in the 1960s. There was a Sunday series of 7 concerts, including a program of works for 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 flutes. The people who have resided at the Master over the years have been just as intriguing as the works performed there. Ward Allen Howe was a railroad buff, travel writer, and former reporter for the New York Times, who also for many years prepared the news items for the electric sign that flashed around the Times Tower in Times Square. There was another media connection in resident Ruth Krauss Ellis. She was private secretary to William E. Robinson when he was publisher of the New York Herald. Sigmund Gale was one of the founders of Harlem's Savoy Ballroom, described as the Mecca of the city's jitterbugs, which booked every name brand, inspired the hit song Stompin' at the Savoy, and was the birthplace of the Lindy Hop. It was also where, at the time, still unknowns, such as Ella Fitzgerald, Erskine Hawkins, and Chick Webb, found a place to show their talents. Saul Bloom, a former stage manager, also lived at the Master and was said to have introduced belly dancing to the US. He also, starting in 1923, was a 14-term congressman, and he was also head of the Foreign Relations Committee. And these next 4 are directly from Jim Mackin's book, Notable New Yorkers of Manhattan's Upper West Side, and they are left to right. Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, writer of more than 40 books, and Nobel Peace Prize winner. Murray Shiskel, the Tony Award winner who co-wrote the screenplay for Tootsie. Tommy Tune, a dancer, choreographer, actor, singer, director, and producer. And Billy Strayhorn, the jazz composer best known for Duke Ellington's Take the A Train. And while other well-known celebrities, including Lena Horne, Marian Anderson, Yehudi Menuhin, and Isaac Stern, did not live at the Master, they all took classes or used studio space there. But along with such celebrated individuals, the Master was also home to a hustler or two and a family story with a twist. In May 1940, resident George Knepper was held without bail in felony court for trying to extort $5,000 from his father and brother under threat of, quote, a slow suffering death. This is one of my favorite stories. Note the headline, Hoofer sues heiress. So shortly before she died in May 1946, Genevieve Clark Hanna, heiress to an oil well fortune and referred to in the press as a wealthy spinster, disclosed to her daughter, Mary Elizabeth Clark, that the daughter had been born out of wedlock. Throughout her childhood, Mary Elizabeth had been taught to call Genevieve not mother, but aunt. This was revealed to the public and splashed across media because one Alex Rotov, to the right on your screen, who referred to himself as a comic dancer, sued the daughter for a slice of the mother's $300,000 estate, claiming that he was supposed to have received 1/3 of the estate due to, and I quote again, services rendered for the previous 18 years to the mother and for a few years to the daughter. It actually gets even more complicated. Apparently, the daughter had fallen in love with him and signed promissory notes to him for $2,800. Then later claimed that since her mother had denied her any formal education, she, Mary Elizabeth, did not realize what she was doing. She claimed that she was brought up in such strange conditions, her words, that she did not learn to write until she was 19. Further, her mother kept to her bed most of the time, made virtually no social contacts, refused to allow maids or employees into the apartment, and thus abandoned care of their home, which, according to her daughter, led it to look like a virtual Collier house, named after the brothers who became famous for hoarding. Bottom line, Rotov settled for $11,000. There were tragedies, too. In 1957, Rebecca Resnikoff, 35, fell or jumped to her death from a 9th floor apartment. Just 7 years later, in 1964, Alice Miller of Huntington, Long Island, also 35, fell to her death from the 18th floor while visiting her aunt, Rose Reitner. One of the saddest stories was a mercy killing in 1953. The Master's 50-year-old handyman, Pedro Vasquez, killed his suffering wife, 33-year-old Francesca, and then himself, shooting each of them in the head. The wife had undergone numerous operations in recent years. Vasquez left a note in Spanish saying, "Forgive me for doing this in this manner, but Taquita, his nickname for her, and I have suffered very much and would suffer more." Their 3-year-old nephew found the bodies. And there's more. At one point, the building was a popular residence among Japanese businessmen. That ended in 1972 when the body of Japanese businessman Atashi Kurihara was found outside a shoe store near the Marseille Hotel on Broadway and 103rd Street. He'd been VP of Dentsu Advertising, Japan's largest ad agency, and while out for a stroll one night, he was stabbed 3 times, and his watch and identification bracelet was taken. The crime made front-page news for 2 weeks in Japan. Kurihara was a black belt in karate, which led police to believe there was more than one mugger involved. 2 of the men responsible turned out to be known by the nicknames of Heavy and Slick. Now, finding the right Heavy turned out to be a challenge for the police, since apparently there were many Heavies at the time among New York criminals. But an informer indicated that there was a Heavy, 6'3", 265-pound Lonnie Epps, who hung out with a Slick, one Warren Stoney. The police soon discovered the 2 men who had been well battered by their victim. Between them, they had a fractured collarbone, injured back, and fractured ribs. And Epps lived at the Marseille. But it turned out that while the mugging was going on, a 3rd man, Chalmers Whitfield, was hiding in the shadows. And it was he who administered the fatal stabbing. Kurihara, a 34-year-old father of 2 young children, had been in the city only 6 months. Epps and Whitfield pleaded guilty to 2nd-degree murder and were sentenced to 15 years to life, while Stoney was allowed to plead to 2nd-degree murder. He was sentenced to 0 to 15 years, was paroled in 1977, and was later caught, of all things, fare beating, and as a result had his parole rescinded. These first 2 murders happened away from the building, but there were 2 others that occurred in the building itself. 18-year-old violin prodigy Miriam Soloviev lived at the Master with her mother Elizabeth and younger sister Vivian. Miriam's parents were estranged, and in 1939 her father, Cantor Aaron Soloviev, who had been living in San Francisco for the past 5 years, appeared at the apartment, pleading with the family to take him back. When they refused, he fired a gun twice at Miriam, hitting her in the neck, but not seriously injuring her. He then shot his wife and his 12-year-old daughter, who had been in bed with a cold. Then he shot himself. All 3 died. And lastly, a murder that brings us back to the beginning of tonight's story and to the Horsch family. By 1958, Louis Horsch's son, Frank, who had been a Time Life photographer, took over as part owner and manager of the Masters. In February 1975, he went down to the building's basement to check on the boiler. Remember, the 1970s were not a good time for the city in terms of crime. While he was in the basement, Frank Horsch was shot 3 times in the chest, neck, and back of his head, and killed. His body was discovered around 6 a.m. the following morning when a maintenance man went down to lower the heat. The 45-year-old Frank Horsch had lived on the building's 17th floor with his wife and 2 young children. On a much lighter note, I mentioned earlier that the master's architecture was distinctive, so let's take a moment to look closely at that, working our way down from the top. On the roof is a ziggurat, or step-shaped stupa. That step shape will come up again in the building design. A stupa is a Buddhist shrine. And remember, the Ruriks were interested in Eastern religions. The stupa was originally metal, probably copper, and at some point was covered over with tar. It's generally believed that this was applied during World War II as a blackout measure. Although, according to one resident and architect, it may have been simply for waterproofing. Beneath the shrine was a meditation room, which is now a small apartment with small balconies on all 4 sides and 360-degree views. If you bring your eye down from the roof to the lower portion of the building, you'll notice that the brick changes color from a very light shade to what's called purple, although these days looks more like gray. This color gradation is very much Art Deco characteristic. It's designed to suggest verticality with the lighter shade higher up. It makes it look taller. There was a solarium on the 26th floor for all residents' use. The setbacks begin above the 14th floor, and these create private terraces with the corner windows I mentioned at the beginning. There are iron grills on the first floor, said to be in the same step back vertical shape of the building and that stupa. At the building's entrance doors on 103rd Street, there are designs in the shape of cornstalks used as symbols in some other Art Deco buildings and repeated inside on the reception desk. The 2-story 103rd Street and Riverside Drive entrances are topped with blue 3-part leaded glass borders above a cantilevered or projecting metal canopy. The central pane of both had been blue stained glass, but replaced with clear plate glass at some point after they were vandalized. And as you can see here, within that blue stained glass, a blue glass frame, the Equity Library Theater is memorialized still today, right up there, with masks of tragedy and comedy. Also remaining behind the Riverside Drive entrance is a grand limestone staircase that splits in 2 different directions on the 2nd floor. There was once a public phone booth in the lobby, which also held a switchboard, and there were elevator operators and uniformed doormen. Inside the lobby today, you will also find the silhouette of the building and the terrazzo floor, while octagonal bronze-like fixtures hang above it. The elevator doors, meanwhile, while in the Art Deco style, are more recent. On the lobby walls, you'll find the work of artists who live in the building or their associates. That exhibit changes roughly every quarter. And since 1926, the auditorium or former theater has been a church. Also, last but not least, when it comes to architectural details, when you pass by the master, please be sure to look at the lower corner on 103rd Street and Riverside Drive, and there you will find an inscription of an R engraved in an M. It is not, as some people have said, for the Riverside Museum, but instead for the Rurik Museum, which was part of the building when that black granite cornerstone was laid. The cornerstone has that same step-back shape as the building. The R within the M is enclosed by 3 dots in a circle, the symbol of Rurik's banner of peace. And behind that cornerstone is a 400-year-old wrought iron box from India inlaid with gold and silver and containing the photos of Nicholas Roerich's travel to Central Asia. And while the building itself no longer contains original Roerich works, neighbors can still find them just a few blocks away at the new Roerich Museum at 219 West 107th Street, just east of Riverside Drive and behind yet another Bloomingdale official landmark, the Shinazi Mansion, which we will share more about in a future presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, so much. I've always walked past this building and it's great to hear the history of it and different people living there. For those of you who have been watching online, now is we're going to go into our Q&A section. So feel free to ask any questions in the chat box, or if you want to ask your question directly, raise your hand. I'll be reading off the ones we have here listed. The first one we got was, do you know how the Roerich Museum on 107th Street was formed? And was there a transfer of works from the master to the museum where it currently is?
It was formed, I know, 2 years after Roerich died. Someone is provided funds for this. I don't recall the name of that foundation. As far as transferring from the master, the collection actually went to Brandeis. And so then Brandeis may have transferred over some, or the museum may have acquired their paintings from other sources. I'm not sure about the details of the newer museum. But if there's someone from the museum here, please jump in.
All right, so seems like Mike Godkin had his hand raised. I'm gonna let him unmute himself now if he has a question.
You're still muted, Mike.
If not, we'll go on to the next question. Mike, if you get a chance, you are able to talk. Let me see. Not so much a question, but Gary wanted to point out that the lobby lights fixtures are the originals that were
Yes.
there.
Thank you, Gary.
Let me see. We have one here. Yeah, and if anyone wants to ask a question directly, you can just raise your hand and we'll let you unmute your mic to ask the question. Second question we have here is what happened to the stained glass panel on the first floor?
I wish I knew. The folks I've spoken to at the master did not know what happened to it. Once again, if there's anyone here from the master or otherwise who knows, please share.
Gary, go ahead.
Okay, so this is more of a story. I worked at Equity Library Theater throughout my high school life. In fact, I did a report on Roerich, but I got an F because the art teacher never heard of him and thought I was making it up.
That's perfect.
And I said to this art teacher, said, "What do you want? Just a report on Michelangelo or Da Vinci?" And he said, "Yeah, that's what he wanted." So on stage, and that stage was tiny. It was a half fly loft. It wasn't a full, like it didn't, your scenery had to fold up when it went up into the fly loft. The theater also was the site of the first revival of Follies. So every Sondheim freak in New York came to see it. And there was an onstage prop room cut into the back wall that had a ladder going up. And for 4 years, I swore one day I'm going to go up that ladder, one day. So right before my last day of being there, I was going to start college and I was going to move on. I had done my, I volunteered there for 4 years. I went up the ladder and there was no light. I had the biggest flashlight I could find in the place, went up there, and I got up to a third level. And in that third level, I found a plaque that was very heavy. So whoever got it up there really wanted it up there and to never be found. But I found it, and the plaque was a relief bust of Roerich and of Louis Horsch, commemorating the opening of the building and their friendship. And there was no way I was going to carry it down because it was very heavy. It had to be about 3 feet high and about 2 feet wide. And I mentioned it to somebody, and I mentioned it years ago, like back in the 70s, late 70s, to somebody. And then when the building was doing its 75th anniversary, I was there for that, and I mentioned it to somebody before the event. They said they went up and looked for it but couldn't find it. So I don't know. Somebody spent a lot of time getting rid of that thing. But the manager of the building back in the 70s was a guy named Bob Muldoon, who loved that building and said to me once, it was a vertical utopian society. That's what he called the building. And he's the one that saved the light fixtures by hiding them in the basement so nobody would steal them and nobody would sell them. So good for Bob Muldoon. And I think that's all I wanted to tell you.
Thank you, Gary. That was fabulous. I would love to see that plaque one day.
Oh, you know it. I don't think that plaque exists anymore, though. I bet it's gone. I bet somebody with a chip on their shoulder or just wanted to sell it for scrap metal,
That's
I'd
a
love to
shame.
see it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gary. We have another question here about, do you know of anyone that has compiled all the murders that happened in the building?
No, but it's a great idea for a book. No, I did not find the murders in any one place. It was through digging through many, 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 many old newspaper articles. So no, I don't think anyone's put them all together.
And the next question here we have is, do you know what happened to the solarium, if it's still there?
No, it's not there. I assume it was made into apartments, but I don't know that for a fact. So once again, any master people on the line, let us know.
Do you know what's on the second floor now?
That is small businesses, and I believe that's the location of the super's office.
Got it. And have you ever been to the top section where the Buddhist yeah.
No, I wonder if you could actually go up to that part of it. I don't know. But no, I have not been up there.
Got it.
I guess you can because there was some work going on up there not that long ago.
Huh.
All the way up.
And then again, if anyone has any questions as well, you can always raise your hand and feel free to make a comment or a question. But again, thank you again for the presentation tonight, Stephanie. It was I love the twists and turns of the building that I feel like I've heard some history before it, but not in this different dynamic of different items. For those of you watching as well, we have recorded the presentation tonight and it should be available on our website. I'm going to put that in the chat now. Feel free to check it out tomorrow morning and we'll have a link of the presentation for anybody to watch and share with their friends. And one last final call for any other questions. All right. Oh, is it possible to walk into the lobby today?
You can probably poke your nose in. There is someone at the desk, so I'm not sure you get very far, but technically you could walk in.
Got it. Ooh, okay. Someone just mentioned that their father had met Nicholas Roerich in the Himalayas and amazed to have lived so close.
That's pretty impressive.
All right, with that, I thank you for your presentation again, Stephanie. And I hope everyone here has a good night. And please make sure to check up our website tomorrow morning for a presentation following future presentations, as well as the recording for tonight's.
Great.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you,
Thank you,
Jim.
Michael.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
you.
Stephanie. Fabulous.